I'm Forrest.
I'm Jackson.
And we're FroJax, and we are here with...
Aodhan MacMhaolain. I'm a folk builder with the Asatru Folk Assembly.
Right on. What is that, Aodhan?
So the Asatru Folk Assembly is a religious organization. We practice Asatru. And Asatru just means those who are loyal to the Aesir. The Aesir are the gods of the Norse, and in a broader sense, they're the gods of pre-Christian Europe. They descend from the ancient Bronze Age, or very early Bronze Age, what they call the Proto-Indo-Europeans, who are our direct genetic ancestors. They're our linguistic ancestors. All of our languages come from them. And their pantheon spread throughout Europe and also Eurasia and parts of the Middle East under the Indo-Aryans. And this pantheon is known by many European peoples, but the Asatru Folk Assembly, the AFA, we follow specifically the Norse and the Germanic expression of this religion. And, as a folk builder, I just host events, and we'll put on what we call moots, which are events, and bloat, which is a ritual that we do. We also do symbol, which is like ritual drinking. We toast, like ritual toasting. And there's a lot of other things that go on in the AFA, like marriages, baby namings, funerary rites, the things you would expect from a religious organization. And we've been around for a long time, and we have 5 hofs, which is our word for a temple or a church. Actually, the term church is pre-Christian. The West Germanics and East Germanics had a version of this word that they just used, like a holy home or a holy house. But we call them hofs ultimately, but it's just church. And we're about to have our first purpose-built hof in who knows how long, over 1,000 years. The first hof that will be built from the ground up, that'll be in Tennessee. That'll be our 6th hof. So we've been doing this for a long time.
Very cool.
Interesting. One of the things that we're very interested in is the importance of symbolism. I feel like that's one of the best ways to get your message across, whether it's in politics or religion, really anything. So what are the most important symbols when it comes to Asatru? Is that a black sun in the background?
That is our kindred flag. There is a black sun behind the Irminsul, which is the pillar that goes up. That's the Irminsul, and then there's a black sun behind it. And that's obviously Odin, if you guys can see him, and he has a little swastika on him. That's actually called a Filfot, or something of that nature in German, or a Zweischaber. There's another term for it that has to do with the actual circular fashion of it. There's different Germanic terms for swastika. We just use the Indic term because it's colloquially understood. But yeah, all of that stuff back there is all pre-German or pre-Christian Germanic symbolism. And yeah, definitely the symbols, they're divine in the sense that it's their imagery that contains within them wisdom and lessons. So like with the Germanic and Norse runes, they aren't just letters. They actually pertain to values and concepts that go beyond just letters. There's a whole lot of things to go into that. Obviously the swastika is one of those. It's a pre-Christian European symbol that you can find amongst the Celts. They had them. There's a great shield called the Battersea Shield, because that's where we found it, and it's a Celtic shield, and there's swastikas all over it. There's a lot of ancient symbols that pertain to our past before we were Christians that we actually carried over into Christian times. You can find swastikas in ancient churches in Germany, for example. So these things have become very taboo because they do teach us important lessons, like the black sun. In particular, it pertains to seasons, it pertains to a lot of different things. The Irminsul is a representative of the axis mundi in folk religions. This is what upholds the cosmos. It upholds the cosmic order. And the Germanic one, which is the Irminsul, it kind of reminds me a little bit of like the DNA, the double helix, so it's like almost as if our DNA is axis mundi within us. It's a thing that upholds cosmic order within us. There's a lot of things that can go into the symbols of our ancestors.
So, and this is actually kind of perfect. Normally for an interview, I'll either know a little bit about the person or whatever it is that they're talking about. And if I don't, I'll maybe look into it a little bit. I had no time to do that. And this might be good because you'll have to forgive the ignorance. I'm going to have to ask questions that are probably to you very fundamental, but I don't know anything about this. So I'm interested to learn. So Asatru, are there different religions that are adjacent to but distinct from? And are there like denominations? And if not, like, what are the differences in terms of, like, is there a central figure of Asatru and then other gods are beneath him or them? And do people disagree about the nature of these things? And is there, like, I guess, theological disagreements? Like, how does it compare to, like, the Abrahamic religions?
That's a great question. Well, ultimately, Asatru is a folk religion. It's an ethnic and racially based religion. And because the gods of Europe are descending from a common source, each tribe in Europe would have had different conceptions concerning these gods. And that's just if you look at it from Greek to Roman to Celtic to German to Baltic, they all had a different kind of conception of how to view these gods and how to worship them. But then there's commonalities across the board. So in a sense, you could say that the tribal differences between these folk religions, they are kind of like denominations, but we're talking about a tribal difference. Within Asatru itself, there are definitely different organizations and different, theories and viewpoints about all of this, but we've been doing this specifically with Asatru for about 100 years. The revival has been going on for some time, and there have been different theories posited about who is the central god, so on and so forth. But within Asatru and within the accepted academic view, without going into any of the other, little side areas, Odin, the Allfather, is the central god, and he rules over a pantheon, or really a tribe, known as the Aesir. And there are, 12 major gods and goddesses within that pantheon. There's very many more beyond from them. And, beneath them, you have ancestral spirits, your own ancestors. If they acted well, they would be in that pantheon as well. And then below that are, land spirits, spirits of the land. And there are definitely different views on all of these things, like which is the way to take, which is the most important thing to focus on. And in the Asatru folk assembly and in Asatru in general, and in Norse and Germanic paganism in general, your ancestors are the closest link that you have to these gods. Obviously, it's great to do ritual to these gods, but your ancestors are most likely going to answer that call. If you're going to ask for something, it's better to ask a beloved, great-grandfather than, Odin. He's probably pretty busy. So it's a little bit different than Abrahamic religions, because the basis of this religion actually comes from what's known, scholars call it the ancestral household cult, which is very similar to Shinto. African paganism does this too. Shinto's the easiest one to point to, though, because it's a living thing that they've never lost, while we've kind of backed away from it. But the ancestral household religion, it is the basis of not only European religion, but also European law. So like burial rights, property rights, familial rights, all of these things actually extend from the ancestral household cult, is what scholars call it. There's a great book, if you want to learn more about the foundation of paganism. Like, obviously it's great to learn about the Aesir and all that, but there's a great book about just the cult itself called the Aryan household or the Indo-European household. There's editions underneath both titles, and it's written by William Edward Hearns. Great book, and it explains how it was the basis of our legal system from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, ancient Germany, ancient Gaul, and how that it has informed us today with our legal systems today. So there are differences, but it's mostly going to be coming from that ancestral household, because we all have different house fathers. We all descend from different Europeans, and that's going to inform us on what ritual we should be doing, how should we be interacting with these gods. And so that's really where a lot of the differences come down to, is people are very particular about their families.
So there is a metaphysical, it's not just strictly ancestral, like there is a metaphysics to it. What is, I guess, can you go into some of that? Like, is there prayer? Is there ceremony? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we do a ritual. Our most common ritual is blot, which is, there's a great article that we wrote about it on Substack. But blot is basically just, you are partaking in the divine creation. So the gods created reality, and to reach them, you, in a way, kind of mimic them like a child mimicking his father. And you process into a space following the sun. You supplicate, you call to them using their divine names. You ask for blessing, and you give blessing. You ask for a gift, and you give a gift. That's where this concept of sacrifice comes from. Obviously, back in the past, we might have used animals, blood, it was common, but you can also use alcoholic beverages, mead in particular. There's a lot of sagas about mead. The Greeks and Romans would have used wine. Wine was seen as a holy, something that you could give that was appropriate to give. But you can also give food, There's many things that you can give as a gift to the gods and to receive a gift in return. But you don't have to actually ask for anything. You can just do prayer and speak to them, especially if you're doing an ancestral ritual. It's very much so like a familial conversation. But in the actual process, that how you actually do it is you're supposed to be following the divine order and replicating that. You're replicating the divine order in your actions. And ritual is just a very formulaic way to do that. You should be doing this in your daily life, acting with virtue, acting with honor, enacting justice, being pious, all of these things. But, when it comes to ritual, it's very formulaic in how it's done. There's other rituals too, though. Ritual toasting is a really popular one with us, where we will do 3 rounds where each person in the circle, always with the circles with us and seasons and cycles, in the circle, everybody will hail God, hail an ancestor, and hail a hero. And they're doing this for particular reasons. It's psychological, obviously, helps build you up, build up your people, but it also, calls fame, greater fame and renown for these beings and people. Which is a really important thing in our religion is fame, renown, having good renown in particular, being seen as a good person to your folk group, to your people.
Very interesting. My brother and I sort of inhabit this flexible, I guess you could call it a middle ground. We're very radical on, I guess, the topic of race because we think it's a growing issue with the demographic change. But in terms of, I guess, spiritual expression, which is a very vague way of putting it, we do have a certain level of flexibility where on this side we have Christian nationalists, on this side we have people who believe in determinism, and then we even have some pagan folklore type of individuals as well. And what we have right now is this disastrous experiment that we call multiculturalism. And so, kind of like broadly speaking, right-wing people will say, well, the antidote to that is that it's going to be okay as long as everybody is Christian. But for me, I would almost prefer some sort of inversion of that, where as long as everybody's white or predominantly of European heritage, I would actually feel okay with different subsets of religious expression. And so I want to ask you about, is there any sort of compatibility between the pagans or the folklore folks or Christians when it comes to the racial component, or is it fundamentally incompatible in your point of view?
So it's a great question, and I have 2 answers. On the one hand, you cannot mix what is sacred. The Hebrew religions are ultimately against all religions in the world. Now, that does not mean that a white Christian and a white pagan can't work together on a common cause. It's just that we can't actually mix those religions in a syncretic way. Christianity actually already did this. There's a great book by Bernard Russell, I think is his name, called The Germanicization of Christianity. And it really covers how, as Christianity came into Germany, it mixed with the German folk customs to create a more modern understanding of Christianity, especially with heroes, and like the concept of like being a hero versus being a martyr, fighting for your people and expelling the enemy, killing the Saracen versus turning the other cheek. There's a difference that came as different Europeans were converted. So obviously there is some level of syncretism that can happen. And that leads into my other answer, which is at my core, this is what I believe, and this is what most pagans believe. We are folkish, and we believe everyone should be folkish. You don't have to be a pagan to be folkish. To be folkish is to just put your folk first and to care about the things that your folk do. So we were non-Christian for a long time, and that makes up a big chunk of our history. A lot of our most famous myths actually come from a pre-Christian time period, such as the Iliad, the Odyssey, the poetic Eddas, which are the foundation of the Norse religion, the Irish sagas. So many things are from a pre-Christian time period, and that's the foundation of us. Our foundation is not the Old Testament. It's these ancient pre-Christian sagas, but we have been Christian for a considerable amount of time. And we are both Americans, heritage Americans. Our families have been here for a long time, and they've been Christian for the whole time. And we can't change that, and we shouldn't seek to change that. We need to embrace it. So my message to both Christians and pagans is to embrace the folkish body, embrace your people at its core. What makes us who we are? It's not our religion. Whether we were worshiping Odin or we were worshiping Christ, we've always been white people. We've always been Europeans, and that will never change. The only way that can change is if we mix genetically. And so being folkish, having a folkish philosophy, you would care about your traditions. So as Americans, there's a lot of things here that make us different than Europeans. I mean, there's a considerable amount of things that we do that are different than Europeans, and we have to embrace that as Americans. And if I was a Spanish person or a Russian or a Latvian, I would have to embrace my particular expression of humanity, which is coming from my people as a tribal group. And then you just expand that out to the race. And that's what folkism is. It's an acceptance of your entire familial group.
How old is paganism, or Asatru, I guess?
Well, it depends on how you view it. I mean, in terms of the actual religion itself, it's thousands of years old. The modern revival of it started roughly 130, 40 years ago. In the mid to late 1800s, there were a lot of scholars and esotericists who started to revive a lot of this. And then it started being practiced openly in the 1970s. 1969 is when our founder, Stephen MacMhaolain, started the Asatru Folk Assembly.
So did it completely die and nobody practiced it and it was just revived? Or were there still like pockets where some people held on to like the traditions?
In terms of state power, it definitely died out. For most of us, it died out in the 7th to 10th centuries. Like the Irish and the English and the French and whoever, they'd mostly died out between the 7th to 10th centuries. Some a little bit earlier, like the Greeks that died out a bit earlier. But like the Latvians and the Lithuanians in particular, they didn't actually convert until the Teutonic Crusades, which were in the 1400s. So only about 600 years ago, the state religion of Lithuania was still a heathen religion. And then in a more like local sense, it never actually died out. To this day, Christians in Ireland, Germany, Scandinavia, Russia, they still practice folk traditions based around certain festivals, certain hills, so on, that actually have their roots in far older things. And like, for example, when the communists were trying to communize the Baltics and parts of Russia, they mentioned these pagans and the things that they were doing. And they were always peasant people. That's actually kind of what pagan relates to, is a rural person, because the religion got pushed from state power to the fringe, to the rural people. And today, who are the most Christian people today? It's the rural people. So that seems to be a thing that happens as state power changes and people get ostracized, So it did kind of die out in a sense, but not really. And so much of our language is informed by this, like the words, the days of the week. Wednesday, that's actually Woden's day. Tuesday, that's the god Tu. Thursday, that's Thor's day. Friday, that's Freya's day. The name, in English, we literally are calling on these gods all the time without even knowing it. The terms heaven and hell are pre-Christian terms. Those are not Semitic Hebrew terms. There's a lot of things that we still carry over. It's because it's in our blood.
You seem to have a very balanced position in that you hold space for acknowledging that you can live in a society that doesn't practice your religion, and you think that people should embrace the roots of that. So in our case, it would really be like Protestant Christianity, if that were the case. So with that being acknowledged, what would be your ideal version of America? One in which we embrace our, I guess, cultural Christian roots and we usher in more of a folklore sort of tradition? Or do you see the two kind of blending together? But you mentioned not wanting to blend them together genetically. So I guess, how would you see that working out in like an ideal America in your point of view?
It's an interesting question. I mean, my ideal is that people would come to understand that our gods do exist and that they've always been there. But in a realistic sense, I really think that like America was founded on Greco-Roman concepts mixed with Anglo-Saxon concepts. That's really what it was. We were trying to build a perfect new city on the hill, a new Atlantis. And I think that for us to succeed, we have to embrace those things. And a lot of that does have to pertain to Christianity. And I can't get over the fact that I can't change the fact that a lot of my people follow Christianity. But at the same time, nowadays, a lot of our people are actually secular. More culturally Christian or just non-Christian altogether. So we have to make room for these people because they are still in our kin group. So just because in an ideal world, I'd like for everybody to understand that these gods are real, that doesn't mean that I can't, or that I don't want these people to thrive, especially because our nation requires all hands on deck. Our nation requires that. So I think that in an ideal sense, we would all learn how to work together, regardless of if we're secular agnostics, atheists, Christians, of Protestants, Catholic, Orthodox, or if we're Asatru, or there's other folk religions, like Rodnovery is the Slavic one. I'd love to see us all work together and on a common cause.
How does Asatru view the contemporary excess of vice, I would say? So in terms of things like social media, looks maxing, pornography, prostitution, masturbation, things that our society, I mean, we really have fallen off the deep end. We live in the excess. I know there's a lot of ancient Eastern wisdom on this stuff. Christianity has its own prescription for those matters, but there's a lot of contemporary vice-centered issues right now, and that's one of my concerns for America. Obviously, there's the demographic breakdown, but we're also a very sick society, and I don't see a whole lot of people pushing a spiritual response to that problem. So how would Asatru view those kinds of contemporary vice type of problems?
Well, we're definitely opposed to them. We do have a different morality than Christians, but it's not so different that they can't understand where we're coming from. If you want to learn more, the source material would be the Havamal, which are the words of the High One, supposed to be lessons of wisdom from Odin, the Allfather. And the Havamal is a great read, highly suggest it to you, because this is basically, it will answer. He basically just goes into detail about how a man is supposed to live. And he warns against over drinking. He warns against gambling your life away. He warns against sexual deviancy. He warns against listening to the advice of witless women. He warns against all of the things that we're currently struggling against. It's that the Havamal really is the spiritual answer within Asatru to these things, because it's supposed to inform you on how to be a virtuous heathen. Our ancestors used to bog degenerates. Tacitus writes about this. We find these bog bodies, where we would put them in a hurdle of stones and throw them into a swamp if they did sexual deviancy. Tacitus also writes that the two greatest vices of Northern Europeans were alcoholism and gambling, which we still struggle with today. And obviously these things, there's reasons for why we struggle with some of these vices historically, but we have solutions to them within Asatru. It's just that, we in Asatru, we like to say that there's a soul sickness. Our people have a soul sickness. And a lot of this comes from us being descended from people who have lived dishonorable lives at some point or another. And this affects the generations going down. It's downstream from that. And so to fix that, a lot of these spiritual ails, such as over-socialization, which pertains to looks maxing, the feminist world that is really China-centric, the kind of geriatric world that we live in too, very elderly focused rather than youthful. A lot of these things can be fixed by attempting to emulate our ancestors. How did they create such good societies? How do we do that in return? And it's by following these virtues that would have informed them. And the best source on that is definitely the Havamal.
Yeah, I'll look into that. What is the general consensus within people who practice Asatru on Christianity? Is it, I hear these things like it's a psyop, it's Christ cucks, like I hear stuff like that thrown around. It's often not backed by anything facts-based from what I've heard. I just hear it as like an insult thrown around. What is the general consensus? What's your take on it? What's the truth behind that?
Well, the general consensus, in my opinion, is just that most of us just think that is not our religion, that's the Hebrew religion, and it doesn't really pertain to us. Like if you go and read the Bible, it doesn't really mention any of our ancestors. You can interpret it that way, like the Christian identity people, British Israelitism and stuff like that. And that's all fine if people want to do that, but it doesn't really pertain to us. It's kind of like Shinto or Taoism is another popular one, or maybe even Buddhism. A lot of Western people are reaching out for some other thing, and Christianity, in a lot of our view, is just another one of those things that we're just reaching out for to try to find a foundation. I struggle with a lot of the other things because I don't like to use the term Christ cuck or inappropriate things, in my opinion. I don't want to speak about figures that are worshipped in a poor way, especially figures that aren't actually openly evil and wicked. Like if it's some evil being from some African religion, I don't mind speaking poorly about it. But if it's a God that our ancestors have worshipped before, and I was raised Christian, so I know what Christ is teaching, and it's not actually evil. But when you read the New Testament, there are some things in there that should cause some eyebrows to lift. I mean, the Catholic Church, the Protestant churches of the modern era, I was raised Presbyterian. A lot of these churches, they have turned away from a traditional form of Christianity as we understand it to a more liberal form. And they're actually using Bible verses to do this. And we can argue about, they're interpreting that poorly. But ultimately, these Bible verses do say certain things which lead into certain political ideologies. Like the early classical liberalism were largely coming from a more liberal type of Christian than the more traditional type of Christian. Yeah, so I'm uncomfortable to say that whether it's a psyop or not, because I just don't know if there's enough evidence. It's 2,000 years ago. But I am willing to entertain the idea that it is subversive, obviously. There's a lot of things that I struggle with about the religion. I was raised it. There's a great book called You Gentiles, written by a secular Jew, and he's basically just gloating about how the Jewish Bolsheviks threw down Russia. And then he says, well, what's that compared to what Paul of Tarsus did? He threw down your ancient religions. You guys were so proud, so mighty, and you had a conception of morality which was so pure and focused on strength and youth and all of these things. And now look at you. And obviously I can disagree with him because medieval Europe was powerful too. Colonial Europe, which is the most powerful we've been, was Christian. So I can disagree with people saying it's a psyop. I can see where they're wrong and they're just responding from, I went to a Christian church and they hurt me. They're responding from emotion.
Right.
And I don't want to do that. I think it's unfair to the historicity of Christianity. And but at the end of the day, I do think that if you take it away from the internet, internet Christian versus pagan stats, most of us just think that that's a Hebrew religion. It's a Hebrew way of viewing things. And we've adopted it and we've made it European, but it's not the same as our pre-Christian religions. Those have always been European. And there's just a difference there. I think we can be informed of wisdom, morality through Christianity. And we definitely have done it. That book that I mentioned earlier, The Germanicization of Christianity, really shows what parts of Christianity were compatible with Europe. Like, why are European Christians so different than African Christians? Well, it's because different parts of it spoke to us in different ways.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's kind of our biggest hang up. There's the component of it that is misinterpreting. And that's why I feel that religion is hard for me to ground something solid in it, because I could read a Bible verse and I could interpret it a way that it gives rise to a completely distinct and unrelated even outcome than someone else who reads the thing and goes on about their life. And part of that is racial too, right? You look at Catholicism practiced in the Democratic Republic of the Congo versus Italy. It's different because the people are different. It's kind of an emergent property. And so I guess what you said is it's Christianity as such in its original form emerged from the Hebrew people. And it's also funny, I was on a road trip with someone recently who was a Christian. He was defending Christianity, and he said white people in Europe reached their heights under Christianity. And I'm like, well, that's one way to put it, but maybe Christianity reached its heights over white people in Europe, right? Like it's kind of a feedback loop there. So I guess for you, where did you come to your belief that, okay, Christianity isn't for me? I believe in Asatru now. This it is an obscure religion, but you sound like you know a lot about it. So I guess where did that divide happen? How long ago was it? What was your path? And then I guess I guess we'll start there just so I don't pile on a bunch of questions on top of each other.
Well, I started walking away from the church when I was a teenager, and it was due to hypocrisy that I saw. I was raised kind of conservative, and things just got so liberal, and everyone got liberal, like my pastors, my family, everyone. And it just didn't really speak to me anymore. And I went to a private Christian school, so I learned a lot about different types of Christianity, and I was so interested in it. But I had these hangups, I had hangups with certain things like that we all come from Adam and Eve. every race. That just didn't make sense to me. That original sin didn't make sense to me. I've always believed in reincarnation of some kind or another. So, Christianity doesn't really have that. So that didn't make sense to me, that we only have one chance at life. And so I started like journeying spiritually, and I studied world religions. And eventually I just realized that like we have our own tradition. Like when you go and read the Old Testament, you actually read genealogies that, modern Jews and Palestinians and other Semites, they actually descend from these men. And I kept thinking like, well, where am I? Where are my ancestors? And I just found them eventually. And then once I found everything that I was struggling with just kind of clicked into place.
Interesting.
And that was maybe 5 years ago that I really kind of came to the conclusion that I was this way.
How old are you now?
29.
Wow, okay. Very cool.
What is the Asatru, if there is one, perspective on the so-called Jewish question?
Well, that's a good question. Religiously, I guess there is a divine contest going on, and there's definitely a struggle going on in our soul, and the Hebrews are at the center of it. Politically, these people are damaging our folk. They're damaging our nations, and since we care about our folk, we seek to defend them. We don't like that. I think beyond from that, I don't really know if there is much more of an answer, because the religion doesn't always pertain to politics. There are definitely different ways that a political system could operate under Asatru and answer that question, whether it's just deporting them or whether it's actually seeking restitution or retribution. All of those things would be accepted.
So you mentioned heaven and hell. Those are sort of pagan conceptions. I mean, can we get a little bit into like the specifics of some? You guys believe in a heaven and a hell? Is there an afterlife? Do you go there when you die? Is there reincarnation? Like, what is sort of the belief around that?
Well, religion definitely is supposed to inform you about the afterlife. That's what every religion's about. And for the pre-Christian Germans, there's a, do you know the world tree Yggdrasil? Maybe not.
I don't think so, yeah.
So the world tree is actually that symbol back there. It's the axis mundi, that which upholds the cosmos. And at the roots of the world tree is the underworld, and that's hell. And actually, hell is named for a Germanic goddess, Hel. And she's not bad or anything. She just governs over the dead. And the underworld is where most people will go. And it's not bad. There's different layers to the underworld. Obviously, at the bottom, you have places like Nastrond, where the soul of a sexual degenerate or a traitor, an oathbreaker, it's just going to be voided out. It's just going to be eaten by snakes until it's gone. And then there's higher levels where, you are living amongst the ancestors. And it's actually kind of nice. And then if you go up the world tree out of our realm into the upper realm, that's where the gods dwell. And some people are brought there, warriors who die in battle, sometimes go to Odin, sometimes they go to Freya. There's different places in the upper world as well where the ancestors gather, and that would be heaven, And heaven just means like, pertaining to the skies, pertaining to the heavens, And so it's a holy place. It's definitely a bit nicer than hell, but neither one of these would be bad. And also parts of your soul get passed down into your family and can be reborn.
All of this brings to mind this movie that I have fallen in love with called The Northman. And now I've actually seen it about 10 to 15 times now. And when I first watched that movie, it really resonated with me, because I couldn't help but feel this is my movie. Because everything is homosexual and weak and Jewish, right? Let's just call a spade. And I'm just tired of it, But this film, it stuck out to me because it felt authentic. Then I read the screenplay. Then I read about how Robert Edgers tried to make it like historically accurate down to like the shape of the boats and the way they were rowing in the boats, and everything was just so perfect. And I felt like finally a piece of art that was for white people,
and totally apolitical too,
And yeah, and it was uncompromising too. It's a brutal film.
So yeah, The Northman, great movie, very historically accurate. It is informed by a leading scholar at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. He's an Englishman, and he did a great job. There are a couple
Nice.
things in it that I think maybe aren't so great, but you're never going to be 100% perfect, and
Right.
it's so close to perfect that I'm okay with it. Other movies that I think are kind of like it are maybe Troy, Gladiator. Those are great movies too. But The Northman is obviously for us Northern Europeans, so it speaks to us in a different way.
I would consider myself a little bit more of a secular person. I would say culturally I'm kind of Christian, but many of the same problems that you point out in terms of the incompatibility perhaps between Asatru and Abrahamic religions are the same problems that we see when we go to church. We see this universalist mixed thing where it's very liberal, and these are the reasons why I have tried, and despite my best efforts, cannot become a Christian. I simply cannot do it. And I'm like, well, I could get many of the same things from something like this, where it's aligned with a little bit more of my racialist identitarian perspectives, and it doesn't have like this, again, the redundancy. But I guess I would be interested in looking into it more. Obviously, it's not as common currently. Is there any place in like Florida or Orlando, or if I wanted to just sort of vaguely get involved, can I do so without actually like being a fully committed person? And I'm just sort of interested in like meeting the people and sort of as someone would do if they walk into a Catholic church for the first time or something like that.
Yeah, so this isn't 900 AD. No one's going to throw spears at you. Everyone is welcome so long as you are a heterosexual, good white man or woman. So you're actually lucky. In northern Florida is one of our Hofs, one of our temples, Njord's the god of the sea, the god of the ocean. I can't remember what town it's in, but we do have a folk builder who's right by you, someone like myself who puts on moots and stuff. I can get you in contact with him, but you can also Google on Google Maps. You can find Njordshof of the Asatru Folk Assembly, and you can see how far away you are. They host a monthly holiday there once a month, and you are 100% welcome to show up, talk. You do not need to be a member to come around. We are welcome to people visiting.
Do you have any final things that you'd like to say to kind of wrap up? And is there any like social media you'd like to plug or anything like that where people can find you?
Yeah, I'll just plug everything. I feel like we had a pretty good conversation. So you can find the Asatru Folk Assembly on Twitter under Folk Asatru. You can also find them on YouTube. We run a weekly podcast called Victory Never Sleeps. You can also go to our website, runestone.org. That's runestone.org again. And you can email any of our leaders. All of our emails are up there. I'm on Substack. I write on Substack under the name Aodhan MacMhaolain or the Enchiridion. You can also type in folkism.substack and I'll be there.
Cool.
Great.
Aodhan, thank you so much.
Thanks for coming on. Nice talking to you.
Thank you.